Hello. Welcome to a brand new episode of What the Fuck Earth. Like, wh- what is this? What is this shit? For real. If you haven't been paying attention, I'm not even going to say that. You have been paying attention. You know what the fuck is going on. So let's talk about it. George Floyd is not the first black person who was unarmed, handcuffed, and subsequently murdered by police. This is not the first time this has happened by any means. This isn't the first time that's happened this year. So this is not a new phenomenon. The idea that these protests started as a response to George Floyd, specifically, not quite accurate. Now, I will say that this particular example was quite egregious because the cop is literally staring at the people who are recording him, who are telling him, hey, can you get off of his neck? Like, you have him restrained. And he's basically just like, I don't fucking care. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. So the visual on this one is particularly bad in comparison to some of the other examples that we've seen before. But the overall details are really not much different at all. And that's a very important point that I think needs to be made. And one of the main reasons why that point needs to be made is because these protests that have been now so heavily criticized as being too violent or too aggressive or, damaging of property or whatever the criticism has been, these protests got to this point as a result of many, many, many instances of pleas being made for change going unanswered. And I cannot stress enough how much that is what we're dealing with here. Because I think a lot of people have fallen into this like mindset of thinking, oh, okay, black people are just mad because this black guy got killed by a cop, and well, black people get killed all the time, black people kill each other all the time, blah, 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 blah. The typical bullshit arguments, right? But I think that people need to do a better job of explaining what this movement really has to be about. Is race a focal point of this issue? Absolutely, 100,000%. And in no way am I saying should we not focus on the racial element of this. But moreover, in regards to the police, there is a serious abuse of power issue that exists with the police. And that's something that exists for everybody. It's not just black people who deal with that. Black people deal with it at a higher rate because of institutionalized racism. But police brutality, aggressiveness, overuse of force, that is something that is a police problem first. And I think it's imperative that we remember that when we talk about this, because while race is literally like right there, I would say tied for the first place on this, there's more to it than that. And I think if we only focus on the racial element, there's a lot of the crowd on the side of opposition or the side of, or on the fence about it, who will see this as being made out to be a racial thing when it's more than that. So I'm going to explain a little bit of what I mean. I've seen a lot of excuses on the internet for the police's behavior, especially in the riots. I've seen a lot of people saying, oh, well, you throw stuff at cops, you get aggressive with the police, this is what you get. And I just cannot stress enough how problematic that way of thinking is. Because the police are not a gang. The police are not this faction that exists in opposition to the citizens. That's not what it is. It's not us and them. That's not what this is. The police are supposed to be a function of society. They're supposed to be an arm of society. They defend civilians. They protect the neighborhoods. They uphold the law. That is their prime directive. There isn't really anything else that cops are supposed to be doing. So it really baffles me that oftentimes when cops are caught doing terrible things to civilians, really breaking that oath and that code, there's always this explanation or an excuse really that, oh, well, cops are people too. Cops are humans too, so they're going to make human mistakes, or they're going to fear for their lives and they're going to react like how you or I would react. But the problem with that is that cops are not just regular humans. They're not just civilians. They're not just you and I. They have a much higher level of responsibility and a much higher level of power. They can end your life. You see what I'm saying? And with that level of power comes a level of responsibility. I mean, Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility. We know this. This is known. But for whatever reason, when it comes to the police, we kind of just throw this logic out the window. We just start acting like, oh, well, if I was in that situation, I could see myself making that mistake. But you're not a cop. You're not trained. You don't have that responsibility. You haven't been trained to be in that situation. It is not your job to handle that situation at the highest level. You see what I'm saying? It blows my mind that when it comes to police, so many people are okay with holding cops to the same standard that they hold civilians. And this has been going on for a really long time. This is not new. This is not something that just started happening in the last couple of years. We've seen it over decades. I remember seeing it when I was a little kid, watching those car chases, right? Car chases on the news. And then when it's all over and the cops catch the guy, they pull him out of the car and they all dogpile on top of him and start beating the shit out of him, right? How many times have we seen that, right? But what do we say? Oh, well, he shouldn't have ran from the cops. Oh, he shouldn't have committed the crime, right? And when it's just you getting your ass beat after leading cops on for, a hour-long chase that endangered a bunch of people, yeah, okay, you getting your ass beat is a minimal punishment at that point. It's minimal retaliation, so it's really not something that people get up in arms about. But it's still wrong. Like, the cop's job is to arrest and detain the person. That's it. It's not your job to grab them and start beating the shit out of them because they made you run or because they made you chase or because whatever the fuck happened. That's not your job. And it's crazy that we've gotten so used to cops behaving that way that we don't even stop for a second to look at that and look at if it was any other job. And we were to do that, we were to behave outside of what we're supposed to do, so much so to where we were physically hurting other people or we were killing other people, there would be no excuse for anybody else. And that is a truth that we really need to wrestle with. That is a truth that, more than anything, people who are so pro-cop, so Blue Lives Matter, they need to recognize that, because we're not saying that all cops are bad. I think it's really just a straw man argument to begin with. It's inaccurate to characterize people holding cops accountable for their behavior as them being against cops or them thinking that all cops are bad. It's wildly inaccurate. I think it's one of those things where it's such an obvious fact that it's almost irrelevant. To say, oh, well, there's good cops when we talk about what bad cops are doing is like saying, oh, well, there are good citizens when we're talking about criminals and crime. It's like, well, yeah, there are good ones. We know that, but that's not the problem. The issue isn't the good ones. The good is good. That's great. Bravo. But that's what we're supposed to have. That is the standard. The standard is good. Good cops are supposed to be the standard. Every cop is supposed to be a good cop. We shouldn't have good cops and bad cops. We shouldn't be talking about, oh, well, there are good cops too. It should only be good cops. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I understand that that is not, just an absolutely attainable goal. Obviously, there's always going to be bad apples, as they call them. But you cannot just stop at saying, oh, there's going to always be bad apples, especially when you're talking about having a force of people that is supposed to be elite. They are supposed to be of a higher tier than just the common citizen. They are held to a higher standard than just the common citizen. So when we're talking about that group of people, we cannot allow for bad apples to just exist with no action. That just does not work. And that is what we've seen so much from the police department. And that is why at this stage, talking about there being good cops, it's who cares? You know what I'm saying? Like, most people just, we don't want to talk about good cops because good cops are supposed to be there. And more so, good cops are supposed to crack down on the bad cops, and they don't. They do not. Because I guarantee you, if those 4 cops hadn't all been arrested, right? Those 3 cops who watched the one cop put his knee into that guy's neck and said nothing to the pro-police Blue Lives Matter crowd, because they're not doing the murdering, they belong to the, well, there's good cops too crowd. But to me, that cannot be. You cannot be a good cop and watch a bad cop do bad things and stand idly by and then continue to call yourself a good cop. You just can't do it. This is how shit works, y'all. Like, this is basic. This is not rocket science. This is very, very basic. The police are not a gang. They are not a special paramilitary force that just gets to run around the streets and fucking, impose their will upon the citizens. That's not what they're supposed to be. And we need to do a better job of explaining to our politicians and explaining to the people who govern us that that's not what we're going to tolerate from the police force. That's just not how it goes. And more than that, we need to talk to other citizens who actually think this shit is okay. Because there's a lot of citizens who welcome this behavior by the police. They think it's okay. And shockingly, this happens to be oftentimes the same crowd of people who's always going on and on about how the government is sticking their fingers in too many things and trying to tell them what to do and this, that, and the third. Like, it's shocking to me that the people who are always so, like, anti-government interference are extremely okay with the idea of the military being deployed into cities to just quell crowds and just disperse crowds and dominate the streets. Like, it blows my mind. It really blows my mind that these people exist, but they do. And as long as they're here, we're gonna have to keep talking about them. So that's gonna be the first video I'm making about this. My very next video is gonna be on Drew Brees. I know that's kind of like a levity jump, but it's on theme and it needs to be discussed because it's very relevant, and it will be very relevant when all of this starts to calm down and we start to return to normalcy, if that ever happens. So that's going to be my next video. Keep an eye out for that one. That's all for this one. Okay, bye.